The rental guarantor market has grown from $215 million industry in 2019 to over $1.4 billion today, with projections to hit $5.7 billion by 2027, making it one of the fastest growing segments in the entire property technology.
The rental rules are so skewed in favor of the tenant. If tenant doesn't pay, you can't kick them out, whether they're paying or not. You don't have a choice.
So desperate because I needed to be for that specific school district for my girls, but I didn't have W-2s and I didn't have a pay stub.
It gives a false sense of security to the investor, and I don't think it's a viable business model.
This is very landlord heavy. And as an investor, this should be incredibly appealing. You should want all of your tenants to have this because the benefits are insane. But as a renter, this is terrifying.
Nothing can stop me. I'm all the way up.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good
morning.
morning, Vietnam.
That's right.
So I'm Meyer Dalal.
Ronan Fishman, resident Canadian.
Alan
Stick
Hastings
him,
cutting
bro.
people off.
Welcome to
No,
the Money
okay.
Matrix podcast, where smart money finds a smarter way. This is going to be an interesting one because I got a call from a investor client that we have and said, I found a way to guarantee my income, so I'm going to start buying a lot more. That was like, wow.
I wonder what the trick is.
Yeah, I said to him, what's the trick that you can guarantee your income? So he said, I found a company that's going to guarantee the rents of any of the applicants that I have. And he said, the best part is I'm going to make them pay for that. I said, okay. So I started doing my own research and I really found that this is a real market and real thing. And the crazy thing is the stats on it are ridiculous. Basically what happens is in the United States right now, most landlords require pay stubs, bank statements, credit checks. They're third-party vendors that actually do all of the qualifications. Is that same in Canada? Do they do that too? Like third-party vendors will do the qualifications?
No, it actually falls on the shoulders of the realtors or the landlord if they're going privately. There isn't a third-party verification. It's so much bigger here because there's so many more people, like 10 times more people, that you have all these outsourced. But no, if you ever want to pull credit and stuff like that, it's a very finicky thing, using authorization and stuff like that. So it's tough.
They have to sign authorization forms and whatnot. Some interesting stats that when I started really researching this stuff, landlords require typically a minimum of 700 credit score. They really don't understand anything other than a W-2 and a pay stub. The craziest stat I saw is on average, landlords in the United States require 40 times the monthly rent as an income baseline. So
Yeah.
if you have a $2,500 a month rent, you need to make $100,000.
Yep. Sounds about right.
Your realtor hat talking. You're saying
So that's the things I'd look at. They'd have to fill in something called a rental application. You can do your due diligence as much as you want, but there's also very specific factors where you can reject an applicant. And if somebody wants to challenge you on rejection, you better have airtight explanation as to why you don't want it. Right? You can't tell anybody that they can't come into your house. You could say no pets, no smoking. You can't stop somebody from smoking in your house, and you can't stop somebody from having a pet. Especially in Canada, now it's different province by province, but in Ontario and Toronto specifically, the rental rules are so skewed in favor of the tenant that the landlord can do all the due diligence they want. But if tenant doesn't pay, first of all, during winter months, you can't kick them out, whether they're paying or not. You don't have a choice. And then once you file an application, it's going to take you another 6 months to get in front of the board. Now, if they make $1 payment towards the rent, it resets the clock.
that's crazy.
Now, the market is so backwards right now. Tenants not only have those rules for them, but the rental rates have plummeted tremendously because they've stopped allowing foreign students to come into schools, where you see all the high rises downtown where all the schools are. Tenants are moving from place to place, getting a 50% discount versus the same unit. So it's way different.
I'm in the California office less than a month ago. There's a sandwich shop on the corner. I'm out for lunch. I'm in line for the sandwich shop. And this woman in front of me drop something. I bend down, I pick it up, I hand it to her. She goes, "Oh, thank you so much. I'm having a rough day." I said, "Why?" She goes, "I'm actually a landlord and I'm going to court today." I said, "Really? You know, I'm in real estate. Tell me about it." Her applicant applied to rent her apartment, and the applicant put in the application that they were between jobs, like they didn't have income. They used to make this much, they don't make anything right now. And the woman declined her.
I see where this is going.
The woman declines her, and the applicant sues her, says discrimination.
Right.
And the woman puts in a second application under a different name and still gets declined because she doesn't have income, and the landlord has full rights to decline the application. She now has to go to court and defend the fact that she didn't take this tenant who has no income.
That's crazy. Hold on. I mean, it's my house,
Right.
my apartment, whatever it is. If someone's not making money and they applied, why do I have to give them an
Right.
apartment? Like what?
Here's what I'm going to say about that. In a free country, you can sue for whatever you want. In Canada, there's something called the Human Rights Tribunal. If it's deemed discriminatory, you get free legal from the government and you can challenge it. Now, whether you win or not, highly unlikely. And most cases settle. So I know of particular cases, and this doesn't just tie into real estate, of somebody who got caught in the crossfire from somebody who is purely a serial human rights case suer. They make their living from finding something that you did wrong,
Right.
go to the human rights, and all this information is public. So they have hundreds of cases and settle them out.
And that's how they make their living.
Correct.
That's gross. So I have an interesting story. Couple things that happened to us. When we moved to California, we were in a short window and I wanted my girls to go to a specific school. And I had money in the bank, credit, whatever. But what I didn't have was tax returns that made sense. The landlord, and I had to be in this school district. So I had no choice. And there were limited properties, and the size of my family was 6 kids. I needed a specific size of home. So I was limited to like 2 properties. So I made offers on both. One outright said no because you don't make money. If you look at my bank account, it'll tell you different. The other one required me to put 6 months worth of rent up front. And after the 6 months,
Illegal in Canada.
after the 6 months, I had to pay the next 6 months in front.
Is that allowed? Do you know if it's allowed?
So desperate because I needed to be for that specific school district for my girls. Someone who's in the business, who's a professional, who I didn't have W-2s and I didn't have a pay stub. And, you know, when my kids went to rent, I had to co-sign.
Yeah.
There was no rental guarantor. When my daughter was in Maryland going to school at the Naval Academy, they wouldn't rent to her. They wouldn't even look at her.
But you're an ethical individual that understands their responsibilities. And now we're talking about both sides of the coin. And if all they understand is W-2s and they want to know that you can subsidize the cash flow, they don't know whether your money is necessarily liquid or anything like that. So they're saying, look, you want my property. This is what it is. Because regardless, your rules on that situation are skewed towards you in California, not the landlord.
Even the property in Maryland that we rented for my daughter when she was going to school out there, she ended up, we ended up having to terminate it early. I called him up. I said, listen, we're terminating early. He made me pay 3 months. I had 6 months left on the lease, but I fulfilled my obligation. The point is, it's so skewed as a landlord, especially in the market we're in now with the rates and the cap rates. This changes the whole dynamic of the industry, because if you have a guarantor that says, we'll guarantee the rent, so I'm pretty much, I don't have to worry about it. Now, the tenant is still obligated to the payment to the guarantor, and the guarantor has to deal with collecting. Typically, the fee on this is either, there's a couple of different ways to do it. I looked into it. It's typically 75% or to 100% of the 1 month's rent. So if it's $5,000, it's 75% of that, or the full $5,000. Or there's a monthly subscription where it's up to 10% of whatever the rent is. And the tenant can pay, or the landlord pays. A lot of times the property managers are putting that into the cost analysis when they give you projections of what it is. So what are your thoughts on that? Is
No.
that something scalable?
No, I don't think it's like there's a business model and it's effective, but overall it's not, and it gives a false sense of security. And I'll explain to you why. First and foremost, the people that need the rental guarantees are people that are already in trouble, so they would have a challenge qualifying.
I beg to differ.
Therefore, they would need that guarantee. But where the real impact happens is that it now creates a false market price for that particular property because landlords don't want to eat it. The markup will be caked into the monthly rent, which is going to be above market value. So if you're an investor looking at the rent roll and this number now says the extra 10% lift on $1,000 a month, so now it's $110,000, your cap rates go up. So you're thinking, oh, this is great. But once that person leaves and you're going out to market value, it's going to drop. So will the property value. It gives a false sense of security to the investor. And I don't think it's a viable business model.
So the numbers, according to Rent Tech Ventures, in 2024, the rental guarantor market has grown from $215 million industry in 2019 to over $1.4 billion today, with projections to hit $5.7 billion by 2027, and that's at a compounded annual growth rate of 32.6%, making it one of the fastest growing segments in the entire property technology.
So I don't think that, I'm not saying that there isn't a market for it. What I'm saying is, if you would DSCR that loan, are you DSCRing it at the rent roll or are you DSCRing it at market value?
We're going to DSCR it on whatever the market value is. But here's the thing. Even if you're making a little less, don't you in your calculations factor in a
Contingencies.
vacancy factor? You factor in expenses, all of these things. Remember, you did a 10-month calculation. You said, I take 10 months out of the 12, and the 2 months is for my contingencies.
Yeah.
Well, in theory now, even if you eat that, your 10 months is really actually 11. And so you pick up another month because you're guaranteed 100%. Now it's up to them how they're going to do their screening and their whatever. It opens up your market pool. It opens up the renter pool for these types of big bank type of operations and your mom and pop investor now who doesn't have to deal with that.
So let's say you're a decent individual and now landlord says, I'm not taking you on as a tenant unless you have this
That's
rental
where I was
guarantee. I'm not interested. You have to have this rental guarantee, which now creates another 10% lift in the cost and becomes the par for the course for the rental guarantee. In jurisdictions like California or Toronto, where it's so skewed towards the tenant, why would I ever give you any sort of rental guarantee?
If someone is a little off kilter, what do you typically do? You try to get another month's worth of security deposit,
So
right?
it's a gray area.
So if I were to rent someone and I'm a little iffy, I'd say, you know what, give me 2 months security instead of 1. So now the here is, hey, listen, that 1 month security, extra month security you're going to give me, go get a rental guarantee and you'll be fine. The biggest challenge is it's not for your W-2 person. And the reality is you're not even dealing with the people that have bad credit. Who you're dealing with is your gig economy worker. That's your main person that's affected by that. The stay-at-home, work-from-home type of person who's contracting out different jobs, your self-employed person, your entrepreneur who just started out doing this type of thing. You don't have a baseline. So what do you have? Right now, affordability is at the worst it's ever been in the rental market and in the housing market. What edge or what one-up do they have if they don't have this?
I'd argue that to Ronan's point, this is a scary thought that this is growing so rapidly. If you're a tenant, now the burden becomes, what if the landlord won't sign you without this and that becomes market standard? All of a sudden, tenants now are shouldering an extra 10%. You were going to make your payments anyway on those 6 months up front. Imagine if they were like, okay, but I also want an extra 10% to prove it.
I don't think it's going to be a universal thing across the board. I think it's unfortunately going to be based on there will be an initial screen. I can't imagine me as a person who has properties. I would do an initial screen. And if I don't truly like what I see, then at that point, I would say, hey, this is an alternative. I wouldn't make it mandatory. I'd say, listen, This is where I stand. This is what I am. But again, I'm a more direct person. But as a business model, people are looking to scale. A lot of institutional big hedge funds are using this model now
I
because
think-
they don't have to think
Look,
anymore.
I can see both sides of the coin. What I
Yeah.
don't like about it is that if you look at Section 8 housing and investing, Section 8 is guaranteed by the government.
Right.
So, it's not going to default. And it's always above market value because there's usually a lot of wear and tear into the property. It's very transient and people don't stick around for too long. If you put this into the market, you're going to get an artificially inflated market price in rents, and it's going to impact the tenant. From the landlord's perspective, I prefer it. Absolutely. I think it's very attractive. But from a cash flow, if you're not doing deep analysis on your rent roll, you could be in trouble where you're getting this extra 10% lift that isn't really there because you're not netting that part out. So it's another line item I'd put in my pro forma if you're trying to really find out what the true net cap of that investment is.
I have a quick question. If you really step back, affordability is at an all-time low. How is this going to get factored in? If people can't afford rent already, they're not going to be trying to put 10% on top.
These stats speak to what a lot of people are saying. We're heading towards a renter society. And it's evident, it's happening. Affordability is key. Those are already in the market are okay. But there's going to be future generations that are going to have problems. And because development and the regulation around development, it hasn't evolved in like 100 years. There's no real new tech for it. And we have all this issue with labor and materials. So I think the rental pool is going to continuously grow for those that want to become landlords and think long term, or at least 3 to 5 years. It's incredible where this is heading.
I think you're right. I think this is a clever way to shift the paradigm back towards a landlord favored situation. Like you say a lot of things about California being tenant favored. This is outside of the landlord tenant relationship as far as legality. Like legally, this is new grounds. There's no regulation saying this can't or won't happen, right? So it's a sneaky way for a landlord to take back some control.
Yeah.
And it's good in certain situations, especially where you're shaky on them. This gives them the opportunity to put a solid foot down and you be, okay, maybe I can take this risk. But I always think about the future implications. It just makes me a little nervous.
So now let's shift and talk about a general market. What happens, talk about Miami or Fort Lauderdale, wherever it is, right? Now, if this really becomes the norm, what happens? Your vacancies are pretty much eliminated. Your tenant pool now becomes here instead of here. You're shifting your whole way you underwrite a file in terms of an investor. Does this make financial sense? And now market areas that weren't doing so well in terms of investability now become wide open because you have this. I mean, what does that do to the market? What does that do to investors?
I have a slight qualm with that structure. I think if you go under the premise, yeah, that all sounds wonderful. But a quick question on the occupancy rate. This just guarantees your rent gets paid. If your tenant is failing, is this agreement going to cover the rest of, say they signed a year lease?
Yes, it covers the term of the lease.
So
and
for
then they
9
have
more
to-
months.
And the guarantor has to deal with the tenant. The
Okay.
guarantor has to pay. If it's a year lease, they have to pay. Then the tenant deals with the thing.
So occupancy in a way is back to zero, but it's
Back to 100%. It's fully occupied. You're not going to have a huge vacancy factor or anything like that.
does the tenant get to stay in the house while the guarantor is paying the lease for them?
I'm
if the
sure
tenant's
they're
failing?
going to try to do something. The logistics of that wasn't really spelled out in any of the research that I saw. I'm sure it's case by case and what the situation is. But overall, as an investor, does this change the way you invest? Does this change the way you look at markets?
If this is available,
No, it's
absolutely.
available.
No, but available meaning like who initiates this? Am I telling all my tenants that they must have this, or is the tenant seeking this?
There's a lack of education right now, and the tenants who get rejected end up going and doing searches online and they find this out. But I think where the lift is coming is from the landlord side, where they're saying, hey,
Yeah.
I don't think that I feel a little iffy. There's these companies, look into them, see what you can do. Like from a justification perspective, if the average rent is $2,500 and 10% is the norm, 250 a month, if they break it down into the minutia of, oh, it's only $20 or $15 a day, it's not the end of the world that you can get your apartment and build your life. As the investor, does this change the dynamic of how you look at
So high level, this is very attractive. Sounds great. But I think when you're trying to hedge risk, especially as a landlord, in jurisdictions where it's tenant friendly, your risk is them not paying and not leaving. That's where you run into problems. If they're gone, you can relist it, you put it back on the market, fine. If in this situation you have a rental guarantee and these guys are paying up the difference if the tenant is not dealing with it, I want to know what the protocol is for those individuals that are
Who aren't
guaranteeing,
paying.
right?
That's
Do they garnish wages? Do they have some sort of personal guarantee to them where
Does
they
it-
can something?
as a landlord, does that matter to you?
Yeah, of course it matters to because
no,
eventually
to
that
get
term.
him out. I understand where he's going
Yeah.
with it. To get him
Right.
out,
But if he's
after-
paying, the lease is being paid.
Yeah,
What
but-
happens after the lease is done?
That's where I was going with my
So, yeah.
original question.
that's a question. But again, what percentage of the pool is
I'm
gonna
cool.
default?
Glad you asked. Here's an interesting phenomenon that's very much Canada related, and I think New York's very applicable to that. Is very applicable to that. I don't think the average individual would default just out of pure moral ethics, but in an environment, and I've seen this with my own two eyes, very successful, well-paying jobs, tenants, downtown Toronto, work in tech, financial industry. This happened specifically during COVID. I had this call at least a couple of dozen times. Tenants like, I'm not paying you. What are you going to do about it? People are like, I was paying $3,000 a month. I don't have to now. And there's nothing you can do about it. More people than not are not naturally defaulting because of unforeseen circumstances. They are taking advantage of the rules that have been set for their advantage. I can extrapolate this to so many different laws that were set many years ago. Divorce law, the case law on that is the same, where you had generally a woman that stayed at home and a husband that was working. If he decided to leave, it's the same thing.
That applies regardless of whether you have a guarantee or not.
Yeah,
If you're unethical going down that line, for all intents and purposes, then nothing makes sense. Because if you're going to take the worst in humanity and say anyone can do that, it applies with or without a guarantee.
But look at the inverse of that, Florida, which is very landlord friendly, right? 2 months takes a long time. If you need an eviction, sheriff will come in and take care of that. It works very, very well because tenants are now on the hook for paying their bills. And rightfully so. If they're not paying, get out of my property.
So by that logic, this agreement wouldn't be helpful in Florida.
No, not at all. I don't know.
But by your
Why?
other, because you
I
can
can get
evict
'em
your
out.
tenants anyway, right?
No, but again, maybe my perspective is different because I'm more of an optimist and say, hey, I think these guys will make the payment. I'd like to have a little bit of a guarantee and I'm okay with it. Or even if I say, hey, I'll bear 50% of the cost. You know what? At the end of the day, to me, I'd rather have stability.
See, look, you're speaking from a position of power. I've witnessed the landlord end of this several times.
I deal with our properties in New York.
Yeah. So I've seen people that this is their nest egg. This is their only investment. And they are blue collar, just scraping by. This is enough. And if tenant doesn't pay, it breaks them. I've seen them walk away from properties, the stress it creates. Most landlords own one unit, maybe two. Their margin of error is so thin that if that individual stops paying, it impacts the entire life cycle of the family. So I know people that were waiters, both husband and wife, bought a secondary property for $300,000. I was there part of the eviction. The individual dragged out that system for almost 2.5 years by not paying a dime. They lost the property, okay? They had to get sued, and they're carrying that property for 2.5 years, and it broke them, right? That's the real life scenario of those manipulating that system. So A rental guarantee would have been amazing on something like that. But what happens when the term is up? Right? Tenant friendly states.
At least you'd be prepared. You'd have several months of wind up where you know that guy hasn't paid. You can prepare yourself at least a little better.
How would you
what I mean?
know? It's only that's on the rental
Big-
guarantee company. No,
Correct.
no.
And I'm assuming that's part of this transaction is the rental guarantee company would inform the landlord, or they would know from the payment source that something has occurred.
What are the benefits for the renter? Your gig economy renter who's 27, 28 years old, just went out, independent contract, just came out of school, computer science, and works different gigs. What are the benefits to them?
I think two different things. One, it gives you a little security. You don't have to worry about a bad month because you're covered. You're not going to lose your apartment because you missed a payment. It also gives you.
Yeah, but you're ultimately responsible for the payment.
Correct. You would come back to current, but at least you wouldn't incur fees that way. You're not going to have a bad rental history. And number two, it gives you a bargaining chip when you're applying, especially in really competitive markets.
Yeah, so it gives you an advantage to go into properties that you may not necessarily be able to go into.
Right.
I agree with that. It's just like a pre-approval for a buyer. If we're giving them that, saying this is your guarantee, you're going to close. If someone goes in with the renter and say, hey, listen, this is a guarantee, I'm going to make my payments. Give me the property.
Or you can use it to negotiate. I'm not going to give you 3 months of security deposit. I'll give you one and a guarantee. And that could save you money.
I think this is positive. I mean, I don't know all the details on the metrics, but it's telling how important it is to have real estate ownership because the tenant pool and the tenancies are growing at a rate. Because a lot of people don't want to own anymore.
I completely
Right, they
disagree.
just-
I think we had a discussion with Tiffany where affordability is pushing it out of people's reach. It's not a desire issue.
Okay, you know what? I take that back. I don't think it's solely based on that.
Right.
I think people are a lot more transient. They don't want to be tied down to one property. But I do agree that a larger component of that would be affordability.
Yeah.
I don't disagree with that. That's true.
And
Alan, do you want to own?
I would love.
Okay.
And this
But
scares
previous
me.
to this, though, you didn't think of it as so important. But now that you're
Yeah.
getting married,
It's amazing
starting
how
a
those
family,
things change.
When you have a family involved. This scares me a lot because this is very landlord heavy. And as an investor, this should be incredibly appealing. You should want all of your tenants to have this because the benefits are insane. But as a renter, this is terrifying because if this becomes industry standard, I mean, my brain is, of course, worst case scenario all the time. I'm like, what if medical offices start requiring this extra charge so you pay your surgery fees? What if I can't have a subscription? I can't loan a car. I can't buy a car if I don't sign an agreement. These things are starting to scare me because we're in an affordability crisis already, and adding on to already stressed renters is not a good thing. It's growing so rapidly. It makes me think that this is our future, and I don't like that.
But are you thinking of it because you're not in that position? You're not a self-employed person where
I don't need
you're
that
thinking
stability.
you don't need that stability.
Right.
You have a check.
Yeah, to some people, this could be the golden ticket because you didn't get your approval for that property because you didn't have a W-2. That's kind of crazy to me.
So I mean, perspective is very important in anything you look at because there's always two sides. If you were just starting out being a computer, whatever you do, and contract underwriter, at that point, if you were going to start out and you had to rent with your fiance, would this be like, holy, this is great? I mean, I would love this. This is an opportunity for us to get a property that we may not have been able to get just because of the way
Yeah, it's definitely an extra
my
tool.
current structure is right now.
It's like MBank to an investor, right? You guys don't turn people away because you don't understand things. Most of the market is, as landlords, like you're saying, very simple. They see the paycheck, they know you can afford it, that's it. If they don't see the paycheck, they don't understand. And this gives you a way to qualify.
But look at the
Where you
number,
wouldn't.
100 times what the actual rent is.
That's a big
You are a realtor in Canada. And that's really the baseline, 100
Times.
40 times.
Yeah,
Sorry, that's 100 grand, 40
Yeah.
times, $2,500.
Yeah, so
You said that's normal.
I used to do a lot of background checks for people. And if they had references, I would call those references. The first red flag is if I think the reference is bullshit. And often you can, they'll ask like specific questions about, oh, they work for you? Great. Or they were tenants with you in the past? Yeah. Okay, great. I'm like, what car do they drive? And I don't, they don't even have a car. and they'd say something. So I'm like, oh, red flag, this is bullshit. I don't deal with that person. Most people are good. Most people don't do that stuff. When you do your background checks, you want to find out that they're actually told the truth.
Yeah, but that's not scalable. I mean, from a onesie twosie, that's fine.
People are onesie twosie, man.
Jamie looked it up. 70% of real estate investors in the US only own one investment
Yeah,
property.
You know what's nuts? These large hedge fund, BlackRock type of own
They're the-
5% of every single home in the United States.
And they're the people who will benefit from this because to them it's scalable.
It's such an amazing tie into what we do. The reason for that is they own only one is because the mortgage product, if it's a debt to income mortgage, is not scalable. There's only so much in your salary that you can afford. The other one is this tenancy issue. I'm willing to bet you of those 70%, at least half of them have run into some sort of tenancy thing. And they're like, I'm not buying another one. Right? This is how it generally works. And then the ones that own just two, I'm willing to bet that it goes from one to owning on average 10. Because if you have good access to capital, you know how to scale the properties and price them in. When we get those DSCR loans, we're doing due diligence in the back end. If we can't get that with conservative market rents, steer clear. It's not a cash flow producing property. It's a scalable model. You can buy as many as you can. It's based on the asset. Go hunt those deals, find those deals. We'll fund those deals, right? So that makes perfect sense. But when you have rules, especially in places where it's tenant skewed, these people that got burned should have probably bought a second and a third, but it's lack of education.
Yeah, 100%. Well, that was fun. That was enjoyable. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it. All right, so on to tomorrow.
Nothing can stop me. I'm all the way up.